And welcome back to the Hat Warriors Theory Thursday. As you'll see, I've exchanged the Halloween hat for the thinking cap again. Um, so I know last week I promised a scripted video this time, but actually I've been reading A New Hero, the World of Warriors book, the only one in what's supposed to be a series, possibly a trilogy, we don't actually know. But I was reading it, and a theory came to mind, and it's quite an interesting one. Sadly, I haven't been able to find like a good way to display extracts from the book on screens. You're just gonna have to like deal with me looking fabulous in the center of your screen. So we start the book with Trick Hope. I don't if you haven't read it before. The story follows a boy named Trick Hope who's um he's like not great. He skips school and whatnot. Like his situation isn't great, and he kind of doesn't like what he does. He doesn't get on well with his dad and whatever. So we get kind of introduced to that in chapter 1. Then in chapter 2, we get introduced to the grandfather or the grandpa, who is who owns a bookshop. So this is interesting. Because this is kind of where this build-up starts. So his grandfather suggests to him he should play some role-playing games. So like some Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that. It's never actually explicitly mentioned which ones, but it's actually no, he says Dungeon Master, which is typically associated with D&D. That's so it's probably Dungeons and Dragons, but basically he gets that out, and he basically talks about fantasy, um, like fantasy role playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, and about here the quote is fantasy, battles, myths, and monsters. It's all in there. It's in all these books, which is interesting. Uh, and so that kind of like sets it up that there's like a fantasy element in Trick's brain. It's actually a lot of things. If you read through the real world segments at the start of the thing, you notice lots of little hints as to what the story is about. So we have the fantasy set up with the role playing games, and then of course we have the bit in the comic book shop which isn't too helpful, but there's a couple of things, and then we get introduced to the bullies. So the bullies kind of like taunt him, and there's a long chase scene, which ends up in a fight scene at the British Museum. But interestingly, the part of the British Museum is, of course, like a Warriors of the World exhibit, which is quite cool. And again, it's another just like a bit of seeding there. And basically, he hides in this hall, and he sees loads of different like warriors stood around. Japanese samurai, Teutonic knights, Roman centurions, and Spanish conquistadors. So, Sakuma, Otto, Brutus, and Gonzalo are the equivalents there. I believe, I don't know quite where, but somewhere here, it also mentions here. Is there? There's somewhere it is. Ah, yeah, here. He comes to halt against a wall, partially concealed by a scimitar-wielding Umayyad warrior. So, for those of you in the know, you'll know I appreciate every Malik reference, because Malik is an Umayyad, so that's quite cool. And basically, it just he's in this exhibit and he's being chased by these bullies, and eventually he's about to make it out of the room, and then he has this pendant that was given to him by his mother, and like he doesn't know his mother and such, and that pendant starts glowing after interacting with him in one of the museum exhibits. But this is interesting because it's the only thing that stops the bullies from catching up with him. So this is where all of these things come together. You have the idea of a fantasy role-playing game like a story and an adventure coming together with the British Museum exhibit of Warriors of the World, and he gets caught in the middle of this with his pendant. And in the actual story itself, Trick is the chosen one. He is the most important person in the world. He actually doesn't accept that at first because he's told he's a great warrior. But it's very clear he likes that. He would kind of like that rule. He'd like it if he could actually fulfill it. And so Trick is at the center of the story, not only for us, but like literally he is predestined to defeat Boneshaker and whatnot. And the pendant around his neck is made out of the most precious material in the wildlands and such. All of this kind of leads together, and the seeding, basically, the fact that he disappears only when the bullies are just about to catch up with him, leads into the big theory. The idea is that Trick, the entire World of Warriors series, is set up from the start to be a dream. I am like 99% sure of this. The idea is, what actually happens, instead of the book's telling of things, he does all the things in the morning, and just as he's about to run out and he's summoned to the Wildlands, he's actually ambushed by one of the bullies and knocked unconscious. He's either like just unconscious for a short amount of time in a coma, whatever, and he has this dream based on the Warriors of the World exhibit, the role-playing games he gets inspired by, the fantasy aspects. They kind of pull together along with his like how much importance he sets on himself, but especially his mother. So the amulet he gets from his mother becomes like important. All these three strands draw together when he enters the Wildlands, and it's actually just a figment of his imagination while in unconscious or in a coma. And he dreams it, and at the end of it, he'll wake up either in the museum, having recovered, or in a hospital, one of the two. And likely what will have happened, just to like give it a bit of ambiguity as to whether or not it actually happened, he will have actually improved his like fighting skills. He'll be stronger, but he won't actually have been there. It's all kind of a dream, but like you could in a way interpret it as not being a dream. That is the theory, which I think is possibly the best thing we can do given the information we get from the book. We get very little information in the book because it's one book, but like I said, Trick is the hero. And right at the end of the book, when he's fighting Borehammer, he is about to die, and then a Deus Ex Machina happens to save his life. Like, it's not quite a Deus Ex Machina, but probably more like Chekhov's gun or something, I don't know. But it's very much, when he's about to fail, he's saved. Now, that could be poor writing, but I don't think so, because the book itself is pretty good. Like, it's definitely a decent read if you haven't read it. But I'm 99% sure it was set up for it was all a dream ending, based on the things I've mentioned, and it seems very much likely, because that's typical how these books finish. It's quite the plot itself is relatively generic, like an important kid who grows up in a not great home ends up being the chosen one. It's like the typical hero's journey, like young adult kind of thing. Very much similar to the vein of Harry Potter, probably, as well as what I'd also mention. It's a very generic story plot. Still doesn't mean it's bad. I'm just saying that. And often, these either have endings which do say it was all a dream kind of thing, or have some implied form of that. And I think the idea that Trick has just drawn the things that have recently happened. If you've ever had a dream, you know that a lot of the stuff comes from kind of stuff you've done recently, what you've done in the day and what you just remember. And I think that's like, it makes sense that that's kind of what Trick's doing in this thing. I don't know, leave your opinions on the theory in the comments below. I will have a customs office video out next week. I know I promised one earlier. I know I promised one last week, but I just really haven't had the time or the motivation. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed. I'll be switching back to my Halloween hat. See you next time.